Hello, let's talk about the adult and aging brain. So this is going to be chapter 8 in your Brain Facts book. Hopefully you have that PDF on you. Again, it's free to download. But this is chapter 8. I'm Sebastian, and we're going to talk a little bit about the differences between the adolescent brain, or the young brain, and an adult brain, and then even the brain as we age. So, as the brain develops, we're actually going to have more gray matter or more neurons in the younger adolescent stages of our life. So as we grow into adulthood, we actually end up losing a lot of gray matter. And that's a normal, natural, healthy thing. So we have more neurons than we actually need as we're developing. And the neurons that don't synapse, or essentially tracks that we don't need there or are not of use to us, excess neurons, are going to then go away, essentially. Okay, so we're going to lose gray matter. So those excess neurons are going to prune away. And the major nerve tracts, the ones that we find very useful, the things that make us potentially more athletic in our older years, those are actually going to be wrapped in myelin as we develop, and the white matter, therefore, is then going to increase. Okay, so it's going to get to its peak volume. So remember that gray matter is the cell bodies of the neurons, whereas white matter are the axons or the nerve fibers that can be wrapped in myelin sheath. Okay. Another important difference is that in adolescent brains, the functions are more locally organized, whereas in adults, there's more distribution. So different areas are working together, and so there's more function across the entire brain versus just specific functions in specific areas. Okay, so it increases in its complexity. Now here we have the prefrontal cortex. The PFC is something that you'll hear a lot about. This is one of the last parts of our brain to develop into adulthood. As much as 21, 25 years of age is when this finishes developing. And I'm 24 right now, so maybe mine's not even fully developed yet. But it's a really important part of the brain that has to do with planning and problem solving. It's about higher level thinking in the future rather than thinking about immediate emotions, acting on thoughts rather than acting on emotions. So acting on higher processed thoughts. Okay. So younger brains essentially will make decisions based on more on short-term rewards. They're going to be more influenced by their friends and their social dynamics, and they're going to be influenced by their emotions. That should become less as a person ages. So you should be able to plan more, problem solve more efficiently, make better decisions not only for now but for your future. For example, saving money is a good example. And suppress impulses. So instead of, for example, if you have cookies laying down in your kitchen and you know that you shouldn't eat them because you're tracking your macros and you're trying to lose weight, you can suppress those impulses much better when that prefrontal cortex is fully wired up and you have that idea in your mind, rather than when you're a kid, you might see cookies and just go for it without even thinking, right? Now, the PFC, the prefrontal cortex in your brain in general, is susceptible to say some minor injuries and hindrances via alcohol consumption. Okay, so if you consume alcohol at a very young age, your development for the prefrontal cortex might be slowed down. It might be inhibited, and so because you are killing neurons in that sense, you are sending inhibitory signals. So do not drink alcohol if you're not of age. Trust me, you're not missing out on much. It is not as exciting as they might make it seem in the movies, but you really want to make sure that your prefrontal cortex develops fully and efficiently so that you can, use your brain accordingly. Now, aging and intelligence. This is a really fun topic because intelligence is one of those things that we still don't fully understand per se. There's a lot of debate between what an IQ test is or should be and whether or not it's relevant. And some scientists think that we do have a peak in some types of intelligence, whereas others say that the data is kind of diverse and not really specific enough, and we can't really make decisions on that or can make conclusions on that. But essentially, anywhere from years 25 to 60 years old is when your intelligence can peak. Okay, there's a difference in some cognitive abilities and when they actually potentially could peak. And here are different types of intelligences. So fluid intelligence is going to include problem solving. So I think of fluid as something dynamic, something that's ever changing. And so this is where your problem solving skills are defined as, so fluid intelligence. Identifying patterns, and that can peak at the age about 30. Then there's crystallized. I think of crystals as like this fixed thing that always is and always will be. So this is like your facts, things that are just strict facts, 100% truth. So crystal in terms of its factuality and its vocabulary. So it's vocabulary and knowledge of facts, and that can increase up to age of 50. So that's a good thing, because imagine you're doing your PhD, but your crystallized intelligence peaks at age 15, right? That wouldn't make sense. So learning more vocab and more facts can increase your crystallized intelligence. Okay, but there's different types, right? You can know a bunch of things, or you can be really good at solving problems in the real time. So both of those are equally important. However, more IQ tests are kind of more about recognizing patterns and seeing patterns where there might not often, not so easily found. Anyway, since we're talking about intelligence and cognitive abilities, it's really important for us to address dementia. Remember that dementia, Alzheimer's being the most common form of it, the most common risk factor, the highest risk factor is age. So the older you get, the more of risk you are of developing some type of dementia. And just the natural brain, the natural way of things, you're going to see small deficits over time. However, dementia, remember, is a diseased state. It is more loss than the average. Okay? So as we age, we're at high risk for not only injury and disease in the mental world, but also physically. And dementia is defined as a loss of cognitive ability that affects our every day-to-day functioning. This goes back to the PFC. So for example, planning and problem solving, as well as decision making, like your finances, impulses, all those things are important for our everyday function as an adult, because you have to worry about bills, you have to worry about paying your rent or paying your mortgage, paying your car, paying all these things, taking your medications if you have any, etc., etc. There's a lot of things that you got to keep in mind. So any cognitive mental hindrance that affects that day-to-day stuff is considered dementia. Okay, so this is why Alzheimer's, the first kind of symptoms are memory loss, spatial memory, inability to remember when to take your medications and things like that. Those can all be early signs of dementia. So normal aging, like I said before, is going to result in some neuron loss, but a lot of neuron death, a significant amount, more than normal, is considered as a disease state. Okay, and that's what we call dementia. What I will say, though, is that to maintain a healthy brain, there's actually only one thing that that has been proven in the literature to maintain your cognitive abilities and prevent the development of dementias, and that is aerobic exercise, so cardio. Obviously, sleeping well, eating well, and drinking plenty of water are going to play a huge role in that. Diet is important. But aerobic exercise, so running, biking, swimming, things that you are constantly breathing, you're increasing your heart rate, but not, unfortunately, not weightlifting. So if you're into weights and things like that, I'm not saying you shouldn't weightlift. In fact, you should weightlift for the benefits of that as well. But you need to do some type of aerobic exercise as well. So a mix of both is generally recommended. As a personal trainer, I can tell you that you should be doing both. Some type of resistance training. You can think of that as weights. You can think of that as body weight, resistance bands, things like that. And aerobic exercise. So, doing your little bit of walking, running, jogging, sports, that kind of thing. Okay? Memory as we age. So it's normal to see a little bit of cognitive deficit as we age, as I mentioned before. But as we age, we lose mainly declarative memory, while other non-declarative memories tend to stay intact. So declarative memory is autobiographical memory, episodic memory, memory of learned knowledge, or in other words, semantic memory is another name for that. So this is stuff that has been declared in you. These are facts. Whereas non-declarative memory has to do with procedures, has to do with things that you've done. And there's a little bit of a debate whether or not these learned motions, especially these motor pathways, for example, playing the piano or singing even, or playing a sport or doing some type of physical thing like playing an instrument, there might be learning in places other than the brain. So some people say that there might be learning in the spinal cord, learning in the peripheral nervous system. We don't know that for sure, but in the sense, non-declarative memory or procedural memory tends to stay intact, whereas declarative memory, things that are more abstract, things that are learned throughout time, that aren't have a physical backup, those tend to go away. Okay. Working memory also declines with age. So this is like thinking about if you're if you get into a car accident and you can see the license plate and it's a hit and run and they're driving away, as a young age, this happened to my sister. She was able to, it was a minor accident. They hit her car and then they tried to run, and she was able to get the license plate and call the police, and then they ended up catching the person. That gets much harder as you age, to be able to read something like a set of numbers and letters, or even just a phone number, and then being able to recite it afterwards once you're talking to someone who needs that information. That tends to decline with age. And our ability to focus on multiple tasks at once also declines with age. So an example of this is a pretty clear example that I can give you is from my family and myself. When I'm driving, I can, I listen to music and stuff like that. And if we're in conversation with someone in the passenger seat, or my parents are in the back seats or in the passenger seats, or whatever is going on, I can manipulate the controls of the car that are on the steering wheel, say to lower the volume, increase the volume, to change radio stations, etc., while driving and while making sure that everything is safe and nothing's to worry about. Even if I'm listening to Google Maps and trying to figure out where we're going, I can multitask there pretty efficiently without a problem. However, you might notice this is when your parents are driving instead, and you ask them to change the station because you're in the back seat, or to lower the volume or to increase the volume, and they're doing something with the car, for example, switching lanes or stopping. It usually takes them time to do both tasks, right? Because they have to focus on one thing at a time. And I've seen that with my parents as well, who are in their late 50s now. So that ability to focus on multiple things at once declines with age. This also has to do with organization. But those are just some things that you can think about. Maybe you've seen some of these things in your everyday life. This is just the natural order of our lives. Now, total brain volume. So as we age, we begin to see volume loss in the brain matter. And this begins around age 30 and 40. The more you use your brain, both physically and mentally, in terms of movement and higher level thoughts, for example, education, that might prolong the loss of brain matter. However, as we age, we are going to see a little bit of neuron loss, and that rate is pretty consistent. However, when we turn age 60 and up, that's when that rate of decrease in brain matter increases. Sorry if there's a little bit of wordplay in there. When we turn age 60 and above, the rate of loss of neurons tends to go up. So we're losing more neurons per day, I guess, if you wanted to think of it that way. So that's why after the age 60, Alzheimer's becomes so prevalent, and the numbers are pretty staggering of Alzheimer's now. As our population grows larger and our population is older, and we have a larger population of older people, Alzheimer's is going to increase. And so we need neuroscientists, we need neurologists to solve these problems, or at least come up with medications or some type of therapy that can improve the quality of life of these people. Okay, so some important structural changes that you guys should understand is that neurons literally get smaller. The size of the soma gets smaller. The dendrites shrink and become less complex in their connectivity. So that means that neurons aren't talking to as many neurons as they were. So, as we age, we lose friends. So your circle gets smaller. So this is kind of a life lesson that you can learn pretty young here, all right? And then your myelin sheath declines as well. So the nerve impulses literally get slower. And so this is why a person who is of age, say 80, 90-year-old grandma, has to take her time to get out of bed, to make breakfast, to put on clothes, get ready to leave. And so, be nice to your grandparents if they're taking a little bit longer to get ready or to do a specific task, because this is just the natural course of aging. Okay. So most of the loss that we see initially comes from the PFCs. This is a double-edged sword. This is the prefrontal cortex is what gives us this higher level cognitive ability of planning and doing these complex activities. Part of our personalities in there as well. And it's the first place we see a lot of significant deficits as well as we age. Okay. We also see some deficits in other places as well, though. So, moving on. Molecular changes that result in large differences, right? So the brain has always been at the nanoscale, right? So there's many things in the nervous system that happen at the nanoscale, and even these minor nanoscopic changes, metabolic changes, can cause significant macroscopic changes in behavior and performance, both physically and cognitively. So the dendrites of the neurons as we age become less complex, and their divisions can literally shrink, leading to less communication between neurons, thus resulting in large changes in neuronal circuits. So imagine you have 100 neurons, And every neuron has the potential to talk to 5 other neurons from their dendrites. As we age, those synapses that aren't used as strongly, or just, it might just be probability based as to what is where and what takes up more energy to maintain, those connections will be lost. So over 10 or 12, 15, 20 years, you might lose one of those connections. So every neuron might only be able to talk to 4 other neurons, and then slowly but surely that becomes less and less and less. Plasticity decreases as we age. So you might have heard that the young brain is very plastic. There's a lot of excess neurons, which means there's a more potential to form more synapses and more complex neuronal circuits when you are younger. This is why you may be pushed to learn an instrument when you are younger, because this added complexity can actually improve your cognitive performance later on in life. Don't worry if you don't play an instrument, though. That's not to say that if you don't learn an instrument when you're young, that you can't learn it when you're older. You actually absolutely can. However, it takes much more effort. You have to have much more focus, and you have to make sure that you are getting enough sleep, because your sleep is where you are going to actually retain those memories and form long-term memories. So sleep well if you want to learn. All night studying and all-nighters do not work. Don't do that. Statistically proven to make you perform worse on an exam. So no all-nighters. Get your sleep. Memory forming is dependent on this plasticity, as I mentioned. So you need sleep and you need plasticity. And as we age, our plasticity gets less. And so there are ways to obviously learn new things. If you want more information on that, there's a doctor, Dr. Huberman from the Stanford lab, who has an Instagram, Huberman Lab, who a lot of his research and a lot of the stuff that he talks about on his podcast has to do with plasticity as we age, and controlling your reflexes and your actions through calmness and meditative techniques, just like breathing techniques can actually change and your focus and things like that. So really interesting. I would recommend you guys follow Dr. Huberman on Instagram or on his new podcast. Neurotransmitters. So dopamine. We talk a lot about dopamine. Every time you hear the word dopamine, you should automatically think at least 2 things, and that is Parkinson's and the basal nuclei, or the basal ganglia, which have to do with movement, which also have to do with Parkinson's. And you should also immediately think of the reward pathway, right? So this neurotransmitter dopamine has shown to decline with age naturally. Of course, if you have a significant death in the substantia nigra pars compacta, that is going to be Parkinson's. That is not a naturally healthy thing. That is a diseased state. That is significant loss of neurons in a specific area of the brain, causing specific symptoms, Parkinsonian symptoms. Okay. Some studies also suggest that serotonin declines with age. Those studies apparently are not as robust. However, as we age, we tend to eat less as well. And not all, in fact, not even most, of the serotonin that's in our brain is produced in our gut. So there is some serotonin that's produced in our gut. So if we're not eating as much and we're not moving as much, meaning our metabolism is down or decreasing over time, that means that the serotonin production will also decrease over time. However, in the brain, that's a little bit different. That connection is not perfectly it's not that simple, but that might be linked as well. So we'll see where that research goes. But you should definitely know that dopamine has been shown to decrease with age. Cumulative buildup. So naturally, as we age, if you know a little bit about genetics, you may have heard of the telomeres that are the end of our chromosomes. And as those chromosomes get duplicated and new cells form through mitosis, those telomeres end up being cut little by little by little over time. So when scientists first discovered telomerase, which is an enzyme that governs how much telomere a chromosome will have, they thought that they found the answer to living forever. But unfortunately for us and for those scientists, that immortality is actually a significant characteristic of cancer cells. So a cancer cell is immortal. It has no limit, and that is not a good thing, right? Because cancer is bad. Cancer can invade the rest of your body and can cause dysfunction and will potentially lead to death, especially if it metastasizes or grows in your brain, for example. So telomeres play a huge role. As we age, that's just going to naturally be cut down, which means that eventually we're going to cut into part of the genetic component that actually codes information for proteins and things like that. So there's going to be natural dysfunction over time once that happens. But there's also going to be metabolic waste buildup. So DNA damage can build up over time. We do have ways to recover from double-stranded and single-stranded DNA damage. However, they are not perfect and they usually lead to mutations. So you can imagine if you love the beach and you love sitting in the sun without sunscreen for years and years and years, after decades, those mutations that are caused by the UV rays of light in your skin DNA will reach deeper parts of your dermis and can potentially give you skin cancer, which is why dermatologists and many others tell you to wear your sunscreen. Okay. Again, these things aren't necessarily at an instant. They take up over time, but you have to be careful, right? Mitochondria are the powerhouses of the cells, and I know you guys know that because it's the most repeated phrase in science ever. But there are metabolic processes that will produce waste and that can build up if they are not efficiently removed in time. Okay. This also leads to immune dysfunction. So your immune function is actually largely dependent on your genes, your DNA, what MHC complexes you have, and your VD and J complexes and how they form for your antibodies and things like that. So over time, that can dysfunction. And so that can cause problems. Also, as we age, we tend to move less, which means we have less blood flow. And less blood flow means that the immune system will likely take longer to act on an infection than, say, a young person. Okay. And without proper immune function and cleaning up metabolic wastes, our synapses, for example, in our brain, are at risk of being disrupted by metabolic waste or abnormal protein buildup. That's called amyloidosis. You may have heard of amyloidosis because in Alzheimer's, there's beta amyloid plaque buildup. In Parkinson's, there's alpha-synuclein plaque buildup. So that's called amyloidosis. Excuse me. And that can be because of improper immune function. So I've already mentioned this, but if you want to protect your brain, you got to do some cardio. So cardio is hardio, but if you do it, it'll be worthwhile. You'll perform better physically, you'll perform better cognitively, retain better memories, or retain your memories better, more efficiently. And unfortunately, it doesn't include weightlifting, but you should do both for other reasons. Weightlifting, resistance training will improve your bone density, will strengthen your tendons, your ligaments, and your muscles, whereas cardio can improve the muscular endurance of your muscles, but as well as your cardiovascular endurance, which can improve your immune function and improve other functions as well, and especially protect your brain. So exercise, go out for a walk, get your heart rate up. So here's question number 1. Non-declarative memory declines quickly as we age. True or false? And the answer to that, pause now if you haven't already, the answer to that, if you don't have the answer, is false. Declarative memory declines as we age, but non-declarative memory largely stays intact. Remember that non-declarative is more procedural, whereas declarative is autobiographical facts, things like that, episodic memories. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter, increases in an aging brain. True or false? Pause now and continue in a second. False. Dopamine decreases as we age. Hopefully you remember that. If it would increase, there might be some dysfunctions there as well, but dopamine tends to decrease. Which of the following is true? A. Myelin sheath remains about the same from ages 20 to 60 years old. B. Intelligence peaks at age 35. C. Dendritic spines of neurons become less complex as we age. Or D. Brain volume decreases mostly in the parietal lobe over time. Pause the video now, discuss, and come up with an answer. The answer is C. As we age, the dendrites of neurons may shrink and become less complex in their branching, which shrinks the overall brain volume. Remember that as we age from adolescence to adulthood, the white matter actually increases and reaches its peak volume as the gray matter decreases. However, as we age from adulthood into more adulthood, I guess, into an older age, those synapses are going to become less complex because the dendrites are going to shrink and not talk to as many neurons. And that is it. I hope you guys enjoyed. Stay tuned for the next video.